Good afternoon to everyone. I think we are in one of the most interesting panels of the forum because we are in the intersection of a number of things. The topic is about energy transition, strategy, supply, and capital flows. And we could not have had better speakers than Mr. Anthony Papadimitriou, CEO of the Onassis Group, who will be the representative of the shipping industry and the supply sector, Mr. Jeffrey Payat, Assistant Secretary of State in the period of 2022-25, and of course, as we all know, our ambassador in Greece for a number of years, who will be representing also the policy side in the part of our discussion. We have Mr. Petros Zanitakis, Deputy CEO of Motor Oil, representing the industry, and Mr. Charles Henry, Minister of State of Energy NMP 2010-2012 from the United Kingdom, and of course, Mr. Pavlos Mylonas, the CEO of National Bank of Greece, who is representing, again, from the industry side, the financing part, which is quite vital, I would rather say, in all of the discussions that we are having. So, how do we navigate through geopolitics, policy, production, transport, economy, and finance? This is the topic of the discussion, which I would like each participant to start with a 3-minute, let's say, introduction, and then continue with the questions and the interaction that we may have together. I will start with Mr. Payat first, to give us the policy perspective. Mr. Payat, you have recently also joined DTEC as the chairman of the Advisory Council, which means that you have, from your previous positions as well, a very good and spherical view of the whole the energy sector, but also this part of the world, our region. The global energy system appears to be becoming a little bit more fragmented, security-driven, especially with the drive of the two recent wars, both in Ukraine, the invasion from Russia, and of course the war that is running now in the Middle East. The crisis has acted then as a catalyst for rapid action. Everybody from the industry, the policymakers have seen that we need to act and we need to do something first to diversify our supply of energy resources, but also our supply of routes. That is very important, especially with all the discussion on choking points that we see now, especially as the Strait of Hormuz is blocked. And a lot of action that we have seen, even with Greece being the leader on that, vertical corridor discussions and you know, what we see with the LNG and the diversification of resources coming from the United States. In this context, how can you assess and what is your opinion in the role of regional initiatives in strengthening Europe's long-term energy security, in particular in our part of the world in Southeast Europe?
Yeah, thank you, Costa. And let me start by saying it's a thrill to be back in Greece and especially grateful to Simeon and the Delphi team for having me here. You talked about my time as U.S. ambassador in Greece. It's one of the best jobs in the U.S. government. Incredibly proud of what we did jointly with our Greek partners during that time. But I think one of the most important legacies, and it goes to the heart of this conversation, was really cementing Greece's role as a regional energy hub, and for all categories of energy. I'm very glad to see the way in which Ambassador Guilfoyle is sustaining a lot of the work, for instance, on the vertical corridor on gas, but it's equally important to leverage Greece's tremendous resource in renewable energy, in wind, in solar, to do more in batteries, and then especially Greece's relationships. And you know, one of the things that I've become more sensitive to now that I'm out of government is just how important those relationships are, both to business ties, but also to the way in which deals are structured. And I think the fact that Greece is relatively unique. Prime Minister Mitsotakis has a strong partnership with President Zelensky in Ukraine. He has outstanding relations with the leaders of the Gulf. He may be one of the few leaders in the world who has a strong relationship in the Gulf and a strong relationship with Prime Minister Netanyahu. And then, of course, Greece has a strong legacy of relationships in Egypt, in Cyprus, in North Africa, in Libya. And I think it's leveraging all of those different capacities, plus what's represented by Greek shipowning, Greece's far overweight role in global tanker volumes, for instance. But back to my initial point. What Greece has done is put itself on the map as a major European and Eurasian hub for energy. And I think the challenge for the years ahead is both to hold on to those reputational gains, but do so in a way that advances all of the categories of energy where Greece is well positioned at a moment when the world is clearly going through a structural transformation to use increasingly green and sustainable sources of energy.
Thank you, Jeff. I will now move to Charles, and I will bring in the discussion the United Kingdom's perspective. The United Kingdom has been leading the energy transition since the 1980s, when the market has liberalized, and we have seen even in the past years the different directions that the country has been taking from its energy policy perspective. You have been leading the agenda on technological agnostic solutions, and I think that has worked out quite well for the UK. And in this sense, how would you assess also European Union's position in this direction, based on the experience that you have?
So, Kostas, thank you, and it's a great pleasure and privilege to join a very distinguished panel. If I could just say in relation to Jeffrey that it's not just Greece who should be profoundly grateful to him, it's the whole of Europe, because as Assistant Secretary, he was there constantly trying to build relationships, get a better energy outcome for the United States and for Europe, and we owe him an enormous amount for everything which he did in that role. That energy is just too important to leave to the market. I know you started talking about liberalization, but particularly for countries which are import dependent, like the United Kingdom, that you can't just hope that investors will come and invest in your infrastructure. You've got to give clear signals as to where government priorities lie. And so the relative balance between sustainability, affordability, security, only government can give those signals. And so industry is looking for clarity. It wants to know what the government's goals are. It wants to know it has a roadmap for how it's going to deliver them and on what time scale. And it needs to have clear financial policies as well. And that's why when we came into government, we introduced the contract for difference, giving people essentially a guaranteed price over many years to give them a legal and confidence that they would be paid back for their investments. And that's particularly important in the low-carbon sector, because in the oil and gas sector, in gas, if you're building a gas generating plant, your costs are in the running of it rather than in the building of it. It's relatively cheap and easy to build. Not as cheap as it used to be, but relatively still. Whereas if you're building a wind farm or a nuclear power station, your costs are up front, and you don't get any money back at all until you start to generate. And your actual running costs are relatively low. And so giving people clear price signals was a really important part of that process. I think each country needs to focus on where they have the most abundant sources of energy, because those, particularly sovereign sources of energy, will be where they're likely to be most affordable. We should be looking to harness resources internationally where they are affordable, and to bring those to market using interconnection. If you have one interconnection like the UK did 15 years ago, you're vulnerable. If you have 15, as we're moving towards now, you have security. And so looking at how you integrate those different parts of your energy system in a much more coordinated way than we've historically done is an important part of that process. In many parts of the world, the solution will be solar. Solar is now the cheapest way of generating electricity in many of the sunniest environments. We've seen the cost of batteries drop by 95%. But for the United Kingdom, our weather is rather more like Delphi today. And solar is not necessarily the best solution. So we have gone for a much more nuanced, diverse approach. A lot of offshore wind, some solar, some nuclear, continuing role for gas, because we recognize that that balance is what's going to give us our security. And if you haven't got security, it won't be clean, and it won't be affordable. So we've gone for an approach which has encouraged investment across that sector, giving us a range of different areas and technologies, because we think that's the best way of guaranteeing security and therefore the interests of industry and consumers.
Thank you very much, Charles. I will pass now to Petros, who has been leading one of the biggest energy groups in the country, in a complex, I would probably dare say, complex balancing act in between investments that you have committed in doing for decarbonizing your business, which is part of the taxonomy and part of the EU, let's say, direction, but at the same time, you have to navigate through all these market shocks and supply disruptions that the recent geopolitical acts has been leading you to do so. So based on that, what is the answer, if you may say, of the energy group in this sense, being a major investor in the market?
Thank you, Kostas. Thank you for coming back. It's nice being back in Delphi, and it's nice, distinguished fellow speakers here. You know, I've known Andonis since the Navy days. I've known Pavlos since, you know, working with the National Bank of Greece forever, even well before he was the governor. And I've known our ambassador, as I like calling him, from his days and his specialization in industry. And clearly there is a relationship with because he used to run at Sussex, I discovered. He's an MP for Sussex, where I went to university. So now, we are a little bit of a different case. We touch upon what Mr. Payet said and upon what Mr. Theodoropoulos said. The region, the strength of the region, and the problems of Greek industry, which Greece and SEV clearly now, with a much more market-friendly approach, is trying to improve and correct, together with the government, of course. We were founded as an export refinery in Greece. So in a way, we were punished for what the business is, which means bring the heavy oil, refine it locally, and export the products. So you pay freight on both sides of the equation, which is completely uneconomic. How did we manage to be here today? By doing it more efficiently, exactly what you mentioned before. So how did we do it more efficiently? By investing in equipment and people. So we continuously invested in the refinery with the support of the banks, clearly, and with the model of the family-public company that we are, which means a long-term horizon. Clearly, long-term is very important, something that we don't know very well in our country, and unfortunately, nor in Europe these days. And with this mentality, we managed to move and become one, maybe the most complex refining company in Europe. Lovely. We bought the Shell network, we expanded the RV network, we went into airplane fuels. Well done. And the world suddenly changes. We are punished for what we do. We have to pay CO2 emissions. We have to come with a decarbonization plan. So what do the best, or one of the best refiners do? What does he do? He makes a plan in 2022 to invest in other activities of which we know nothing, but they're still there in the energy field, and spend the money, which we knew the return on investment because we could estimate and calculate it, into a new business. This plan, which came out in 2022, effectively, we thought of it and started working on it in 2018. So it was early. In 2019, we bought our first 10 megawatts of wind, operating wind. We expanded our wind, and today we are at 900, mainly wind and a little bit of solar, and actually 72 megawatts of batteries, where the first batteries that started operating, they got a license a month ago to start operating. We had a plan for 4 billion, split between the refinery, because you have to continue investing in the refinery. So the number at the refinery was 1.5 billion investments, and 2.5 billion investments would go into the new energy. This was 22-30. We have already spent 64% of that. So practically, the remaining number is 600 million, roughly it's balanced, 600 million for the renewables and 700 million for the, let's say, traditional economy. So what did we do? Continue investing, continue trying to do as well as possible the new activities in which we were involved, and try to have this balance between the new requirements that we have in the world.
Thank you for this. I will now move to Mr. Papadimitriou. Antonis, the recent geopolitical events have shown to us that there is a big vulnerability, if you may say, in the global energy transportation routes. Everybody's talking about, the shipping route security. Where do the ships go? We had the first shock was with the sanctioned vessels that we have seen from the Russian war. Now we have the choke points. Everybody's talking about the Strait of Hormuz, all of these VLCCs and the other vessels that are locked in the straits. And this creates a shortage in the shipping sector in terms of supply of vessels. We have a lot of sectors that are affected. It's not only the tankers, it's also dry cargoes, it's also LNG vessels that are transporting natural gas. So how do you see this? Is it a structural shift? Is it something that we will overcome? Is it something that will affect us for good the way that we are thinking and the way that we are investing in the supply routes?
I think this is, thank you very much, first of all, for the question. I'm very happy to be again here in Delphi. And I would like to thank also Pavlos, Mylonas, and National Bank for the invitation because it came Pavlos personally. Thank you, Pavlos, for inviting me. So shipping is, of course, shipping is a consumer of fuel oil. But mainly it is a critical part, is a critical link in the supply chain. And it's critical because it supplies the marginal quantities. So most of the quantities for crude oil and LNG would be transported by pipeline. Shipping is the one that will that will get the quantities that are needed to the place that is needed from the place where it is not needed. So it provides, so it's a marginal supplier of energy, particularly for oil and LNG, but also for coal. And Greece is very critical in this supply chain because Greek ship owners control a disproportionate number of ships, both in crude oil ships, product carriers, as well as LNG, and to a lesser degree in bulk carriers that carry coal. So each one of them, so we are very interested to see what is going to happen because we need to have to make investment decisions like everybody else. Like Spiros Theodoropoulos here was mentioning, you are investing not for tomorrow, not for the next 2 or 3 months, you're investing for the future. So you buy a ship, you order a ship today, the ship will be delivered in 2.5 or 3 years, and the ship will have a lifetime of between 20 and 30 years. So we're looking, so a decision that, as president of the ONAS Foundation, I would make today is a decision that will have effects from 2030 to 2050, when I probably will not be the president of the ONAS Foundation at that time. Somebody else will probably be. So that's, then we have to get to renewables and also to nuclear. So the demand for oil, the demand for LNG, the demand for coal, and the demand for renewables are correlated. And nuclear is a part of that equation. So to make a long story short, I think what is important to analyze, not today in the 4 minutes we have, is a question of availability and affordability. And the question is a relationship between price and quantity. So at what price do we have availability? The price is very important. At $110 per barrel of crude oil, you have different availability pattern than you have at $60 per barrel. So tell me the price, I will tell you the availability. And the other thing is, of course, regulatory constraints. So the states will have to decide what they want to do. So if there is a guaranteed price for renewable energy for the next 20 years, that will impact the demand for crude oil, it will impact the demand for gas, and etc. And nuclear, and I will stop here with nuclear, nuclear is a very important part of the equation. nuclear is, in my opinion, the only real zero carbon fuel. There is no other really zero carbon fuel. This is zero carbon, but it has a huge cost. Huge cost. You have to put all the money up front, and as it was said earlier, that investment will not produce a return for the first possibly 7 to 10 years until the nuclear plant is built. Even if it is 5 years, which private investor will put money, 1.5 billion, 2 billion, 3 billion, in an investment that will produce zero return for the next 5 years and wait to get the returns from year 6 to year 50?
In an uncertain market, energy market.
We live in a world of uncertainty. This is also the opportunity, of course, for those who have the guts to go ahead.
It's very interesting that you are raising the nuclear subject also from the shipping perspective, which is effectively contradictory in the sense that it's affecting your business indirectly.
It is affecting, because, definitely. You know, it's affecting your business. And we have looked at, we have even looked, you will be surprised, we have even looked at nuclear-powered ships, which I will not recommend to anybody.
So I hope after your statement, Mr. Mylonas will continue financing your shipping fleet.
I've just had a heart attack hearing that we finance nuclear plants for 50 years.
So now with this, Mr. Mylonas, I will pass on to you. And, you know, we have listened to about investments, various investments from different energy sectors, from renewables across refining and, of course, shipping and the supply chain. Banks and National Bank of Greece, being a leading energy bank here in Greece, are behind all of these investments with the uncertainties that we have discussed for the long term. It's not for tomorrow. Every single energy investment looks at a horizon of 20, 30, 40 years ahead. So with this in mind, and the fact that you know, we need to be looking at opportunities, affordability at the same time, and creating value for everybody, for the shareholders and for the banks as well, how do you see, you know, Greece and the sector, the energy sector in Greece, navigating through this complexity?
As you said, it's a complex sector, probably the most complex that we finance. Banks like boring. We like cash flows that are steady, predictable, and these are long-term projects with unsteady cash flows, which are becoming even more unsteady. Just now, in the past crisis, the question of security, which Charles mentioned as being one of the trifecta. You want a transition, you want security, you want affordability. The issue of security, again, rose to the surface, had risen to the surface with the Russian-Ukraine crisis. Now it is another part of the world is raising security issues. Security clearly raises the cost. You need insurance, diversification, other forms of tackling the issue of security. That just raises uncertainty, makes cash flows less certain, makes it more difficult for banks. So energy is a difficult sector to finance. I think we're doing quite a good job in it in Greece as NBG. But it's getting more difficult. Charles mentioned the role of the government, and the role of the government needs to be steady, and facts are forcing it to be less steady. So that when the rules of the game change, that upsets various projections we have. Europe went from fixed rate tariffs to market rates. That changed the game because before you had almost a bond. You knew what you were going to get paid for the next 15, 20 years of the project, and you knew it was financeable and viable. Now you don't. There are ways of solving it. Corporate PPAs is a sector way of matching producers and consumers. But given in Greece that we have a lot of small producers, a lot of small consumers, that makes it more difficult. We as a bank have created a new product, which is a sort of a hedge product for matching consumers and producers, which is also helping. But it's not enough. If the direction is in renewables, Greece is a victim of its own success. We have a lot of electricity, almost 50% of electricity produced by renewables. There's so much renewable capacity that at midday, the price is at zero, and the grid doesn't accept currently almost 10% of capacity. How do you, in your credit committee, approve a project when you don't know whether it'll be 10% or 20% not acceptable and the price will be zero? Okay, part of the solution is going to be grids, which is public sector. It's a natural monopoly. The government has to improve the grid. That increases demand. Interconnectivity with other countries, that also increases demand. So there are ways of reducing it, but the increased role of renewables in electricity needs government intervention in the form of infrastructure. It may also need the UK solution of CFADs for future, which gives it's a smarter fixed-in tariff, much smarter than the old ones which provided subsidies. All generators need to have perhaps would become more bankable if they had either flexibility payments so that if there's a battery attached, they can provide instantaneous matching of demand supply. Don't forget, this is a sector that has a strange characteristic. Demand always needs equal supply, always. And without storage, it's got to be the generator. If storage comes on board with batteries, which are another issue, which are also difficult to finance. Batteries buy low, sell high, and they arbitrage and they make money. That's great. But if there's sufficient batteries, then there's no arbitrage, and then they're not bankable. And in a battery, it's a 15 to 20-year project. Do we know if in 10 years that capacity constraint has been reached? So financing, as a conclusion, financing these energy products is very difficult given the volatility of the prices and the switching between the various producers, whether it's baseload or current use through renewables. So it's a very complex system. It keeps changing because these issues, as I described for renewables, no one had thought about it truly 5 years ago, that too much renewables would be an issue. So as a bank, we're trying to think of ways to make these bankable, have the cash flows become as steady as possible. We need a regulatory framework that is steady, cannot change without knowing 5, 10 years in advance what the changes are going to be, and certainly no knee-jerk reactions such as caps when prices are too high or extraordinary taxes or things like that. So we need a stable regulatory framework as well.
But what I take is that this uncertainty will be priced in all of the decisions that will be taken, both from the part of the banks, but also the part of the investors. And I would ask now Petros in this respect, how do they see in terms of the decision-making approach that they have at the group, the different decisions when they have to choose between different sectors? I mean, obviously the returns from the trading or the petrochemical business may be higher than renewable energy, but there is this macro level strategy that we're moving towards electrification. You need to be in the sector, so you have to have investments in this respect. So, how do you balance this kind of decisions next to what obviously Pavlos had just mentioned?
It is very difficult, almost impossible, because the environment in which we operate, as Mr. Mylonas described, is not bankable. Because it keeps changing. And unfortunately, there is a distance in Europe, at least let's talk about Europe rather than doing it very global, between what industry and what individual companies' decisions and strategy have to take and make, and the governments and the authorities in general. And I'm talking on a pan-European basis. because we need grids, we need freedom of movement, and we need longer-term strategy. Because clearly, when we are in the middle of doing a big project with renewables, and it is solar, if we don't have PPAs in place, and if they are not ready by a certain period of time, then we will have curtailments and uncertainty. So it is not bankable. So the way we make our decisions, we have been lucky because we had the luxury of choosing, of being able to choose. So we grew through M&A, through acquisitions. But now that the acquisitions phase is behind us and we have to grow grassroots with some projects, it is becoming more difficult. Thank God, most of the plan is in place, so there is not so much left, let's say, up until 2030. But to move from that point onwards, it is difficult. The utmost important point is balance. So a few years ago, people were almost shooting anything that has to do with refinery. Now suddenly, we discovered that the capex, that the investments we did in the refinery over the past 5 or 6 years, which have been relatively the highest investments of any refiner in Europe, are paying off. Because we have jet, diesel, to supply the European market. Not only the Greek market, the European market. So, balance. But to be able to have this balance, we definitely need the support of the system, the government, and the regulatory authorities across Europe, I would say.
Flexibility in this respect for the business community is definitely key, and flexibility in terms of regulatory.
I mean, to give you one more example, suddenly we were buying 75% of our crude coming through the Straits of Hormuz. A month and a half ago, zero. Yes, we were able, because we lived through very difficult times from the period of 2010 onwards, and so had alternative supplies of crude. So we switched from 75% through the Straits of Hormuz to zero, and still operate flat out. But this is, almost impossible.
So I will move to Mr. Papadimitriou. Do you think that maybe we should start thinking about the energy business more in the along the lines of the shipping business? Because we have been considering, as Pavlos was saying, a flat business, a boring business, the energy sector so far, but it seems so that it's not anymore. And the shipping business has not had, 20-year-long contracts, very safe. A lot of ships have been built, and we're talking about multi-million investments on the open market concept.
First of all, the oil business has never been boring, I think.
Especially these days, eh?
From the age of Rockefeller, it has not been boring. It has been a very volatile industry, a very volatile market, extremely volatile. We had oil at that point in time at $3 per barrel. It went to 20. It went to, at a point in time, it went to 120, 180. It went to 60. Now it's 120. Tomorrow it can be any number, depending on what Mr. Trump will tweet this evening. We don't know. So, but in shipping in particular, we have this also geopolitical aspect. So we have in shipping, we have a number, it's a finite supply. We know how many ships exist today on the water. There are 930 VLCCs on the water today. That's the number. As well as we know how many refineries there are, what is their product mix, what are the products, we know that. So what we don't know is there are 60 ships inside the Gulf, of which one is ours. We have 40 ships waiting outside, so 100 ships are
loaded,
immobilized. There are 130 ships that are sanctioned, therefore unusable in the normal market. So that leaves 700 of ships to do the work of what was 930 ships. So that creates a very high return for the immediate future. Now, immediate future means 2 months. That's it. That's how far we can project. Now, we need to make a decision for a very long term, not based on these numbers. So a lot of our Greek fellowship owners are going all out, full speed ahead, ordering ships. So there are another 260 VLCCs on order today to be delivered to the next 3 years. 2.5 years, to be correct. So in this environment, what is the decision making? Because but by the way, to make a small aside for Pavlos here, if a project is not bankable, it's not investable. There can be only one answer, and we need to do that. And I'm not a proponent, I'm very much pro-private initiative, and I don't think the state is the solution to all these problems. I wouldn't rely on a state guarantee for the next 30 years. I wouldn't rely on that. However, if you want to do it bankable on all these other projects, you would need to have the state to give you a contract for difference or a minimum guaranteed price for 30 years. And you need to rely on that.
Yeah.
And so that means a place which has rule of law and where the government is true to its word, and a place which doesn't have geopolitical risks, because the government that gave you this guarantee may be in a state that tomorrow doesn't exist or for a number of geopolitical reasons is under.
It's very interesting to see how we have, had a major shift in the geopolitical balance act, and I will move to Jeff about that, because the US has been a major dependent on, hydrocarbons coming from the Gulf, about 4 to 5 million barrels per day. Today, they were at 500,000 barrels. It's almost nothing compared to what the United States has been consuming. So you have the past few years, I would say, both on the natural gas business and on the oil, you have been a leading exporter, and that has changed a lot and has shifted a lot the balancing routes, the trades, and the business that has been done in the region. So how do you see the United States' role now in terms of European Union's energy security, especially in our part of the world, and because the discussion is not only about natural gas. As Petros just said, even U.S. crude oil flows have started coming into Europe more heavily these days.
Right. Yeah. Well, first of all, I really appreciated the clarity of Paul's presentation, but I also sympathized greatly with his dilemma as an investor who's dealing with this period of extraordinary geopolitical disruption. And I think if you pull the lens back just a little bit, think about what the past 4 years have brought. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine and essentially the cutoff of Russian energy to Europe. The war in the Gulf, taking 20% of global volumes off the market. I mean, many of us are old enough to remember the 1973-74 OPEC oil embargo.
Yes.
The volume of oil that was taken off the market at that phase was less than half of the proportion that has been taken off the market by this crisis. And think about all the changes that came from 1973. The rise of the US domestic oil industry, what you talked about, the fracking revolution, efficiency standards, and both in Europe and in the United States. Our economy today is astronomically more efficient in terms of unit of energy per unit of production than it was at that time. You have the China factor, which we haven't talked about yet. But the challenge that all of us face as China relentlessly builds this massive electrostate with an agenda to control supply chains up and down everything related to the electrification of industry and transportation. And then finally, you have the challenge of the energy transition itself. So the form of energy is changing. The United States is in a relatively privileged position because we are so abundant today in our own domestic energy production. We're doing 13.6 million barrels a day of crude oil, But importantly, we built more renewable power in the United States last year than any year in the history of our country. You wouldn't know that from the rhetoric of this White House, but it's the case because that's where industry is going. And there is a fundamental transformation of our energy system domestically that's happening in the United States, along with what the CEO of GE Vernova calls a super cycle of demand growth created especially by AI and the huge spike that that's creating in energy demand in the United States. And then the final point I will make here, and I really appreciated Mr. Papadimitriou's observation about the marginal barrel, because I think the Trump White House has learned an important lesson that even when you do produce 13.5 million barrels of oil a day, when you have a shock to that marginal barrel, like has happened since February 27th, that is felt in the United States. And that is an effect that is going to last for many, many months once the strait is reopened, because there is going to remain a risk premium around commodities moving through the Gulf. And that is going to mean that everybody is going to want to diversify.
But unfortunately, this is hurting more Europe. The European Union is more vulnerable to this kind of shocks. And this is what we have been discussing also earlier with Charles, that the UK is in the fortunate position to have this autonomy, a little bit greater autonomy compared to the rest of the European Union. But how do you see this? What should governments do and focus more on, promoting decentralized energy, promoting all forms of energy, bringing back production also in our lands, because we also, as Greece, and our Prime Minister have said that a number of times recently. We have signed a lot of very important agreements with Chevron, with ExxonMobil. So we are looking at exploration and production also here back in our country. So maybe this is the signal.
So this is the second crisis in 5 years, which has been caused by overdependence. Initially, overdependence on Russian gas. We reduced by 90% Russian gas coming into Europe. And now overdependence on the Strait of Hormuz. And we will get energy crises every few years. We had one with the Gulf of Mexico, with BP 15 years ago, which had questions about the future of deep-sea drilling. We had the Fukushima catastrophe, which created questions about the future of nuclear. Every few years we're going to get it, and it is delusional for people to think that this is like a one-off, and then we can go back to business as usual. We've got to find a different way of doing this. We've got to be much clearer about what our national interests, as we've been hearing on the refinery side, are. And so we are not going to be so dependent on imports, and imports which are through strategically challenging locations in order to meet our energy needs. And I think the public recognize that they have to pay more for security. It is more expensive, but it is nothing like the cost of insecurity. Because when you haven't got security, as that you won't be clean and you won't be affordable. And that has to be the driving force for government. We have put in place policies which have driven investment, the concept of transparency, of longevity, of clarity, to give investors the sort of clarity which they need. But we've got to do it in a way that carries people with us. And at the moment, my great fear is that we are losing the public debate on energy matters. People are feeling angered, let down by their governments. And we've got to find a much better dialogue which focuses on security and national interest first.
So as a closing remark, because we are running out of time, Mr. Mylonas, where would you bet more on the direction of investments from the bank in the coming years, let's say, in the near future, based on what we have heard?
Shipping.
I'll give the easy answer. Diversification, I think, was mentioned many times. So the logical thing is we diversify across renewables, across the more traditional players who are also transforming themselves. The shipping industry, as you know, we are big supporters of shipping. So we're financing across the board the best investments. So.
Okay, some positive notes then that, diversification, first of all, is key, and we see that from an investment point of view, from a banking point of view. from supply route point of view. So this is one of the important messages here. And let's think positively that all of this will end up really soon. But this complexity is going to be the next new norm. It's not going to be a black swan, as we used to say in the past, like one event in a lifetime. So we need to be prepared for that. And I think the industry and the policy making is actually indeed really prepared for it. Okay. So thank you for that.
Thank you.